The siren that announced the beginning of the trial was not a sound so much as a pressure, a low vibration that rolled through Mark's ribs and set the alien cadet's frills and sensory crests quivering. One moment the training cavern was washed in a soft blue glow from suspended orbs embedded in the ceiling, throwing delicate light over the stone platforms and smooth metallic observation rails high above. The next moment, the orbs flickered once, as if blinking, and went out. The darkness that followed was not just absence of light, but a thick, suffocating curtain that fell in an instant. It swallowed the last traces of color, blurred the outlines of friends and obstacles, and turned the cavern into a vast, featureless void. Mark heard someone gasp sharply, the sound clipped off as if the darkness had teeth. A scraping noise followed as claws slipped on stone, then a dull thud and a choked curse in a language Mark did not fully understand. He did not need to see to know how the others reacted. He felt the sudden shift in the air as bodies shifted and recoiled, as limbs flexed and tails whipped instinctively. The alien cadets had been briefed on the trial, of course, something about sensory deprivation and adaptive navigation, delivered with the usual instructor calm that made everything sound routine. None of the instructors had said it would feel like falling into a bottomless pit without moving an inch. A thin, nervous whining started somewhere to Mark's left, the tremor in the sound rising and falling like the predator alarms he had heard during previous exercises. "Lights!" someone hissed, breathless and disbelieving. "The orbs! The orbs are gone." Mark could not see who spoke, but he recognized the voice. Sierra, the slender cadet with tripled pupils and pale, translucent skin that darkened under stress. She was proud of her keen, low-light vision, always boasting that she could spot a moving target before any sensor pinged. Right now, her voice sounded like it belonged to someone much smaller. Another voice answered, this one deeper and steady on the surface, though Mark could hear the forced calm underneath. "Do not move. Do not panic. This is intentional." That was Jor-El, broad-shouldered and dark-scaled, the one the others always gravitated toward when instructors were not around. Mark heard the faint metallic clink of his harness as he shifted his weight. The instructors would not... A grinding boom cut Jor-El off. Above, some hidden mechanism sealed with a final thunk, and a ring of emergency indicators Mark had not noticed before winked out in a synchronized sequence. The faintest suggestion of outline vanished from his vision. Mark blinked, but the darkness did not change. It pressed against his eyelids whether they were open or closed. Someone stumbled into him, a bony shoulder jamming against his ribs. Mark's hands shot out automatically to steady the cadet before reflex pulled the other away. Soft chitin scraped against his palms, then retreated. "Do not touch me!" a panicked voice snapped, high and strained. Mark recognized Javi, the youngest in the cohort, who still favored padded gloves during climbing drills. "I cannot see. I cannot feel the light. Where is the glow? Where is the guidance?" "Calm down," Mark said, but his voice sounded small in the hollow dark. He tried again, louder. "Everyone, just breathe. No one move until we know the ground." The suggestion was ignored. He could hear it in the frantic shuffling, the scraping of clawed feet against stone, the quick, ragged breaths as cadets spun in place, reaching for vanished visual cues and finding only empty air. One cadet bumped into another who pushed back, and in the tangle someone's tail lashed out and hit an armor plate with a sharp crack. A hiss of pain followed. The chaos spread along the line like a wave crashing against rock. Mark kept his feet planted and forced himself to stand still, muscles tight but controlled. The darkness was familiar to him in a way that it was not for the others. He thought of power outages back on Earth. City blocks plunged into blackout, the stars suddenly bright and sharp instead of swallowed by neon. He thought of camping trips in pine forests, of his father's steady voice as he explained how human eyes could adjust to starlight if given time, how sometimes all a person needed to do was stop flailing and wait. "This is not right," Sierra whispered somewhere ahead. Her voice trembled, then caught on a sob she tried to swallow. I see nothing. Not shadows, not edges. My eyes are open. Are my eyes damaged? Your eyes are fine, Mark said, turning toward her voice, though he could not be sure of the direction. Sound bounced around the cavern in confusing ways, echoing from unseen pillars and recesses. The light was completely removed. Give it a moment. We do not give moments when senses fail, Jor-El growled. There was fear in his voice now, buried under frustration. We compensate. We switch to biolume. We use the beacons. A few cadets fumbled with their gear, claws scraping over smooth polymer. Mark heard latches being opened, panels sliding, switches flipped. Nothing changed. No reassuring click of activation, no soft hum of stored power coming online, no faint glow. The darkness remained absolute. Instructors! Javi shouted suddenly, voice cracking. Instructors, our gear is not functioning. There is a failure. You have to restore the orbs. This compromises safety protocol. This violates... His words cut off as a different sound echoed through the cavern. A deep, rolling laugh from somewhere high above, amplified by speakers hidden in the stone. It was not cruel exactly, but it was not sympathetic either. The tone carried a challenge. Cadets! An instructor's voice boomed, hollow with distance. Mark thought it might be Instructor Vedra, though the distortion made it hard to tell. The parameters of the trial have been adjusted. All artificial light sources and powered illumination have been removed from the environment. The system will not respond to your usual commands. You will complete the nav course in this condition. Sierra's voice rose shrill with disbelief. You removed every light? Even the emergency guides? That is... You will rely on alternative methods, the instructor continued, implacable. You will proceed from the staging platform to exit Gate 3 without artificial illumination. Sensors and video feeds remain active for monitoring. Injuries will result in extraction and failure. An hour limit starts now. A harsh tone rang through the darkness, echoing off stone like a struck bell, and then the connection cut with a faint pop. The silence that followed felt heavier than the dark. Mark heard breathing everywhere. Some cadets panted, shallow and quick. Others held the air in their lungs so long that when they finally exhaled, the release sounded like a sigh of surrender. He waited for someone to take charge, to turn the panic into a plan, but the usual certainty that radiated from the aliens when they navigated sensor-rich training rooms had evaporated. Without glowing markers and shifting holographic guidance, the space around them might as well have been an endless cave on an uncharted world. We cannot see the path, Javi whispered, her voice small. The darkness made it hard to guess how far she stood. How can we move if we cannot see where to place our feet? We have other senses, Jor-El snapped, perhaps more sharply than he intended. We listen. We taste the air. We feel vibrations. Spread out and... He faltered. Mark could almost picture the lines forming between the cadets, as each realized the same problem. Their senses were sharp, certainly, more refined than most humans could claim. Some could smell trace chemicals in the air and identify species by the faintest skin oils. Others could feel micro-vibrations in stone and detect movement yards away. But every one of those senses had been trained in tandem with visual cues, confirmed and calibrated by a constant wash of color and light. Here, with sight completely severed, all those other senses felt like untested guesses. The cavern smelled of dust and metal and faint recyclant from the air system. Vibrations from distant machinery hummed faintly underfoot, but without spatial reference, those signals blurred into meaningless noise. We will get turned around, one cadet muttered. We will walk in circles. The instructors want to see us fail. This is not a navigation trial. This is a cruelty trial. Stop talking about failing, Mark said. His voice sounded thin again, but he forced more steel into it. Talking like that makes it true before we even try. Easy for you to say, Sierra shot back. You grew up on a world that tolerated dark. We did not. We designed light into everything. We do not sleep without glow. This depth, this nothing. She broke off, the words swallowed by a sharp inhale. The air felt cooler now, whether from some environmental system or simply from the way fear leached warmth out of the moment. Mark rubbed his palms against his trousers, grounding himself in the familiar roughness of the fabric. He experimented with opening and closing his eyes, just in case there was the faintest gradient he had missed. There was not. The cavern might as well have been sealed away from every star that had ever existed. For a few seconds, he allowed himself to feel it fully. The helplessness, the disorientation, the edge of fear that whispered that one wrong step could mean a broken leg on unseen stone or a tumble into a chasm. He felt his heart thud against his ribs and listened to the blood in his ears. Then he forced himself to remember other nights. He remembered sitting with his grandfather under a sky so clear that the Milky Way looked like a spilled band of salt thrown over black velvet. His grandfather had turned off the camping lantern on purpose, laughing softly at Mark's initial complaint. "Too dark," Mark had protested as a child. "I cannot see the path." "Give your eyes a moment," his grandfather had said, voice calm. "Give your brain a moment. Darkness is not empty. It is just unfamiliar. If you panic, you miss everything it offers." Back then, it had taken several long minutes before Mark could pick out the faint silver of the path, the outline of pines against starlight. Here, in this engineered cavern, there would be no stars, no gentle horizon. But the principle remained. Darkness did not have to mean paralysis. It only meant that the tools needed to change. The alien cadets did not know that kind of darkness. Their worlds were oceans of light, carefully controlled, every structure threaded with bioluminescent veins. Mark had seen pictures of Syrah's home city, towers wrapped in slow, pulsing neon, streets marked by flowing color codes. The idea of cutting all that away in an instant would feel, to them, like ripping out half a person's senses. No wonder Syrah's voice shook. Mark inhaled slowly, counting the beats, then exhaled with the same measured control. The air tasted dry, with a hint of stone dust that clung to the back of his tongue. When he spoke again, his voice found a steadier rhythm. "We need to stop thrashing around," he said. "Every step you take without knowing the ground risks someone falling or twisting something. First, we figure out where we are relative to the platform. Nothing about the actual layout has changed. The trial designers did not move the walls. They just hid them." "How do you propose we figure out anything without light?" Jor-El asked, but his tone had shifted. The growl held curiosity now, the grudging kind that Jor-El reserved for ideas he did not yet trust, but could not dismiss. "We could shout and listen for echoes," Mark suggested. "We can use touch, our feet, our hands. We orient to the last thing we knew, the staging platform under us, the railing we stood near." "I cannot even find the railing," Javi muttered. There was a faint scrape, then a thump as she apparently bumped into another cadet. A soft curse followed in a language with too many consonants. "Stop flailing your arms," someone complained. "You hit my jaw." Mark extended his right foot cautiously, feeling for the edge of the platform. His boot met a slight drop, maybe a few centimeters, then solid ground. He shifted his weight, making sure he had grip, then reached out with his left hand. His fingers found empty air for a moment, then brushed something smooth and cold. Metal, the rail that had encircled the starting zone. He tightened his grip on it, grateful for the anchor. "I have the railing," he said. "Anyone near my voice reach toward me, low and slow, so you do not smack me in the face. Once someone else has it, we can have the line follow and orient like we did in the smoke drills." There was a pause, then the faint rustle of controlled movement. Syrah's hand found the rail a moment later, her slender fingers bumping into his. She flinched, then steadied herself. "Here," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile sense of order. Behind her, another set of claws found the rail, then another. In less than a minute, a rough semicircle formed. The cadets pressed close to the edge of the staging platform, fingers locked on the shared anchor. The panicked shuffling quieted, replaced by a tense but focused stillness. Mark imagined the shape of them in his mind. Jor-El's tall frame slightly hunched to fit under a low-hanging stone outcrop. Sierra pressed on Mark's right, Javi clinging to the rail with both hands, knuckles pale. Others spread out in both directions, their armor plates faintly clinking as they adjusted their grips. "All right," Jor-El said, breathing a little easier. "We have orientation. The rail curves around. The path down the ramp should be—" He hesitated, then cursed softly. This would be simple with markers. "We still have time," Mark said. "An hour is long if we do not waste it in place. But before we go stumbling through, we need a way to see more than what our boots can feel directly under us." "You just said we have no light," Sierra murmured. "Do you expect us to grow new eyes in 40 minutes? Mark smiled in the dark, the expression more for himself than for anyone else. A memory rose, not of starry forests this time, but of smoky caves in survival manuals and old documentaries about early explorers. He remembered illustrations of flickering flames held high, shadows dancing along stone walls. He remembered paragraphs on improvisation, on how humans, long before powered lamps, had learned to harvest the very environment for light. Resin that burned slow and bright, vines and fibers used as bindings and wicks, stone tools to spark the fire. The idea settled into his mind with a satisfying click. The instructors had removed the tech, the orbs, the engineered glow. They had not stripped the cavern itself. In fact, if this was a designed trial, there was a good chance that the materials he needed were here on purpose, hidden in plain sight before the darkness fell. A test within a test. A human lesson buried inside an alien-designed challenge. He tightened his grip on the rail and spoke into the dark, his voice firmer now, carrying a thread of something that might, if the others heard it right, pass for confidence. "We do not need their lights," he said. "If we do this right, we can make our own." Mark kept one hand on the railing so the cadets would know he had not wandered off, even though the dark made every centimeter feel uncertain. He heard shallow breaths from several sides, and the faint clicks of claws adjusting on metal. No one rushed to answer him after he announced that they could make their own light. At first he thought the silence meant disagreement, but the tension in the air did not feel hostile. It felt like a collective suspension, as though each cadet waited for a reason to believe him. Mark drew another steady breath and spoke into the thick dark, choosing his tone with care. If he sounded too confident, the cadets might interpret it as arrogance. If he sounded uncertain, he would only add to the panic. He needed to be calm, but grounded, as if the fact that he could not see meant less to him than it actually did. "We need materials that can burn," he said. "A source that will hold a flame. Resin, sap, anything sticky or oily, vines or fibers to bind it. A holder that will not crumble. The cavern might have all of that." "You intend to start a fire inside an enclosed facility," Sierra said, her voice still shaky. "Flames consume oxygen. Flames spread." "A controlled flame," Mark corrected. "Small, contained, something we can hold. A torch, not a bonfire." Jor-El grunted, a low, thoughtful sound. "Fire is unstable. Our species does not use it outside of industrial chambers." "I know," Mark replied. "But humans used it everywhere long before we had tech. It is one of the oldest tools we have. If we can gather the right stuff, we can manage a small flame safely. I will handle the ignition." Javi shifted her weight so suddenly that Mark heard the scrape of her boots along the platform. "You can make fire from nothing?" "Not from nothing," he said. "From friction, spark, pressure. There are ways. But first we need something that can burn." "We cannot see," Sierra whispered. "How do we find anything in complete dark?" "By touch," Mark said. "By hands, by boots, by the feel of the wall. The cavern is not empty. It has texture, layers, pockets." He reached out his free hand until his fingertips brushed stone. It felt smooth in some patches, but rougher higher up. He rubbed his thumb along a ridge and felt small flakes crumble into powder. No resin here, not yet. But the cavern had been built with purpose. The designers had not intended for the trial to be unsolvable. The materials had to be somewhere. Mark turned his head to orient toward the faint airflow he sensed against his right cheek. It meant the cavern was not uniform. Some sections had draft, others did not. Where air moved, there might be cracks, protrusions, plant roots, or seepage that the instructors expected cadets to identify. "We search methodically," he said. "Not all at once. We start with the walls around the staging platform. Slow movement, small steps, one hand on stone. If someone loses contact, he or she stays still until someone finds him or her. No running, no guessing." Jarrell exhaled through his teeth, but Mark heard acceptance in the sound. "All right, you lead. You seem to know what you are looking for." "I am not the only one doing the searching," Mark said. "But I can guide the direction." He stepped a little closer to the edge of the platform and let his fingers slide along the wall again. The cadets slowly released the railing, though some did so with visible reluctance. He could feel their hesitation in the air, a tremor that vibrated through the stone when Javi lowered her weight onto her toes, as if expecting the floor to vanish. "Mark," Sierra said, standing closest to him now, "how will you know what resin feels like?" "Sticky, thick, slightly grainy, depending on what the cavern designers replicated. If the wall has old deposits, it might crumble at the edges but cling at the center." "You are very certain." "I need to be," Mark said softly. He pressed his palm against the stone, then dragged it upward. The cavern wall changed texture about half a meter above the platform's surface, from smooth carved stone to something more natural. The shift was subtle, like moving from polished granite to weathered limestone, but he felt it. "The walls above are less processed," he said. "We check higher." Sierra lifted her hand and touched beside his. She inhaled sharply when her fingertips found the transition. "You are right. This surface is less uniform." "Spread out," Mark said. "One arm's length between each person. Keep one hand on stone at all times." Boots scuffed softly. Armor plates brushed against each other. The cadets adjusted their spacing until a loose half-circle formed along the wall. Mark stepped sideways until his shoulder brushed a narrow column of stone that jutted slightly from the wall. He followed it upward with his fingertips, feeling for cracks or soft patches. Nothing yet. To his right, Sierra moved cautiously, her breathing slow and audible. Farther down the line, Jarrell scraped a claw along the rock, testing its composition. Javi muttered under her breath, whispering some steadying mantra from her homeworld. Mark took another step along the wall and felt something rougher drag beneath his nails. The stone here was layered, crumbly in thin sheets. He brushed it away, revealing a deeper layer beneath. His palm met something tackier, faintly adhesive. He paused. "I might have something," he said. The shuffle of bodies stopped instantly. He pressed his thumb into the substance. It resisted slightly, then gave with a soft stickiness. Not entirely wet, not entirely dry. It clung to his skin the way tree sap used to cling to him during hikes on Earth. He lifted his thumb slowly, testing the viscosity. It stretched in a thin strand before snapping. "Yes," he whispered. "This is resin or a synthetic version of it. We can use this." "You found it already?" Javi's voice cracked with disbelief. "I barely moved a meter from the rail." "Search trials reward calm hands," Mark said. "Help me confirm it." Sierra reached him first. Her fingers brushed against his, then the resin patch. She recoiled slightly at the tackiness, then steadied herself. "This is unpleasant," she said, "but it does match the description you gave." "It is perfect," Mark said. "We need more of it. Enough for several torches." Jarrell approached next, his heavy hand pressing firmly against the resin patch. He grunted. "Dense. Will burn if ignited." "Exactly." "How do we gather it without seeing?" Sierra asked. We cannot chip stone in the dark without sending shards into our eyes. We do not need to chip much, Mark said. Just enough surface resin for the bindings. He brought his other hand to help scrape gently along the wall. The resin balled under his fingers in soft clumps, sticky, grainy, perfectly usable. He wiped some onto the inside of his wrist to hold it, then resumed gathering more. The cadets followed his example, though with far more hesitation. Mark listened to the tiny sounds that revealed their inexperience. Sierra's sharp breath when resin stuck to her claws. Javi's quiet groan of disgust as she tried to peel a piece off and succeeded only in spreading it across her palm. Jarrell's low huff as he broke off a larger chunk. "Do not drop what you gather," Mark said. "Press it onto your wrist. It will stay there." "It is sticking too well," Sierra muttered. "Good," Mark said. "It means it will burn longer." "Burn longer means more oxygen consumption," Jarrell reminded him. "We need to ensure this will not endanger us." "One torch will not," Mark said. "The cavern is large. Airflow is active. Listen." He paused and closed his eyes, not because the gesture changed anything visually, but because narrowing his focus helped dampen the sensory overload of the dark. He listened past the cadets, past their breaths and their small movements. There, a faint whir of an automated system somewhere high above. A current of air brushed across his cheek again, steady and cool. "Ventilation is running," Mark said. "The instructors would not allow open fire without air control." "Unless the trial includes hazard response," Sierra said warily. "If fire spreads—" "It will not," Mark said, "because we will control it." Jarrell scraped another chunk from the wall. "We have resin," he said. "But what of the holders? What of the bindings?" Mark took a cautious step back toward the rail, orienting himself by memory and the faint echo of his boots against stone. When his hand found the metal again, he slid along it until he reached the closest support column. He felt along the base where ground met structural reinforcement. Nothing useful there. He needed something plant-like, fibrous, flexible. Vines. "We searched the ground near the cavern's natural edges," Mark said. "Roots grow near moisture, and moisture collects in crevices." "How do we find crevices without falling into them?" Javi asked. "Slowly," Mark said. He steered himself away from the platform rail and let his boots feel the stone beneath him. The floor changed from polished training surface to rougher cavern rock about a meter ahead. He felt the grit shift beneath his sole. He crouched and placed his hand against the ground. The stone was cool and uneven. Between ridges he felt dust, small pebbles, and something softer. He pinched it between his fingers. A thin strand, root-like. He tugged gently. It gave resistance. His pulse quickened. He followed the strand with his hand until he reached a thicker tangle of fibrous material curled against a low wall. "Here," he said, excitement warming his voice. "I found vine roots." Sierra knelt beside him, her hands brushing along the same area. "These are strong," she murmured. "Dry, not brittle." "We can braid them," Mark said. "Bind resin around the ends, wrap them tight." "How do we shape the torch without a core?" Jarrell asked behind him. "We cannot hold raw resin in our hands while it burns." Mark reached sideways until his fingers brushed something solid and cylindrical. He gripped it and felt its weight. A fallen stalagmite fragment, smooth and sturdy. He turned it in his hand. Perfect size, perfect shape. "We use these," Mark said. "Stone fragments. They will not catch fire." Javi crouched on the other side, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "You are assembling a torch in complete dark." "We all are," Mark corrected. "Take what you gathered. Come here." The cadets moved slowly, their movements cautious but more controlled than before. One by one they reached the patch where Mark knelt. Sierra began separating the fibrous strands methodically, her hands steadier now that she had something tangible to do. Jarrell found another stalagmite shard and tested its weight. Javi pressed her resin into a larger clump, forming it into a crude shape. Mark worked by touch, guiding the other's hands when needed. He wove the vines around the stone fragment, then coated the top with resin, pressing it firmly so it clung. The process was messy. Resin stuck to skin, to claws, to armor joints. Vines tangled and resisted. The dark made everything slow, awkward. But it worked. Bit by bit, the shape formed. A crude torch, but functional. Mark held it in both hands, testing its balance. "One done," he said quietly. "We can build more if we need them." "This looks," Sierra began, then stopped. Mark knew she could not see it. He smiled. "It feels right," he said. "We just need fire." Jarrell shifted beside him. "You can ignite it with no tools?" "I need a spark," Mark said. "Stone on stone, pressure, friction. We can do it." "If you can ignite it," Sierra said, "then you will lead with the first light." Mark inhaled, feeling the weight of her words. In the dark, leadership was not a title. It was trust. He tightened his grip on the torch, felt the vines secure under his fingers, the resin sticky against his thumb. "I will," he said. "And once we have light, we move." The cadets inhaled together, a quiet collective breath that felt like the first sign of unity since the orbs had vanished. Mark shifted his stance, reaching for the right stones to strike, and positioned the torch beside him. The darkness no longer felt suffocating. It felt temporary, overcome by the simple promise of fire. Mark held the half-finished torch in one hand and the two fist-sized stones in the other, weighing them carefully as the cadets shifted in a tight cluster around him. Even though none of them could see a thing, he felt their focus converge on him with the sharpness of a drawn blade. Every breath sounded deeper now, every movement quieter. The darkness did not change, but something in the group had. They expected the next sound to be a spark, the next breath to be illuminated. The pressure made Mark's fingers tingle, but he forced his shoulders to remain relaxed. He needed precision, not tension. He set the torch down beside his knee with slow, deliberate movements, then ran his fingertips over the stones to feel for the edges. One stone was smoother, likely worn by water or time. The other had a rougher surface with a sharp ridge along one side. He positioned the rougher one in his left hand and angled the smoother one in his right. "Be ready for noise," he said. "When stone strikes stone, it might echo." "We are ready," Jarrell answered, though his voice was lower than usual. Mark braced his elbows against his ribs, creating a stable frame. He exhaled slowly so his hands would not tremble. He struck the stones once, hard enough to generate friction, not hard enough to send fragments flying. A dull crack sounded, followed by a faint ringing that bounced off the cavern walls. No spark. He adjusted the angle and tried again, rotating the smoother stone to catch the sharper ridge of the rougher one. A second strike cracked through the dark, this time creating a tiny burst of heat that he felt rather than saw. He listened to the dust settle. "Again," Sierra whispered, barely audible. Mark struck the stones a third time. Something changed. The sound, maybe, or the feel of the contact, because the rougher stone scraped instead of hitting flat. A faint, fleeting spark broke free, too small to ignite anything but enough for him to sense its warmth against his knuckles. "Closer to the resin," he murmured. He lifted the torch by the handle of wrapped roots and angled the coated end toward the point where his hands worked. Javi gasped softly when he moved, but she did not back away. Mark positioned the stone with the sharp ridge just centimeters from the tacky resin. He struck again, this time sacrificing control for velocity. The stones collided with a short, bright crack that echoed like a slap in the dark. A hot spark spat outward, landing on the sticky resin with a faint hiss. The resin did not ignite. Resin needed more heat, more consistency, but the scent of warm sap drifted upward. "It reacts," Jarrell rumbled. "Again, harder." Mark nodded and struck the stones again, faster now. A few sparks scattered. One hit the side of the handle and flickered before dying. He narrowed the angle, struck again, then again. His hands vibrated from the repeated impacts, but he kept going, gritting his teeth to maintain consistency. A shower of several sparks burst outward and peppered the resin. The sticky material smoked faintly, warming but not yet burning. Mark rotated the torch to expose a fresh patch, then struck once more with all the force he could safely use. This time, the rough edge sliced a tiny groove along the smoother stone. A spark twice the size of the previous ones shot forward and embedded itself in the resin. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the resin glowed orange at a single point like a tiny ember cradled inside tree bark. Mark leaned forward quickly and blew on it, short, controlled bursts. The ember grew, brightening just enough to glow through the resin. A whisper of flame curled upward, trembling like a thread caught in wind. Sierra let out a sharp inhale. Javi made a soft, stunned whimper. Jarell growled with what might have been approval. The tiny flame licked higher, catching on the resin's surface. It grew as the sap heated, spreading in slow spirals around the top of the torch. Mark fed it air with gentle blows, careful not to extinguish it. The small sparks became glowing petals, unfurling into a single stable flame about the length of his thumb. The cavern around him shifted, no longer pitch black, but bathed in dim, flickering amber. Shadows sprang to life, writhing across the walls like silent, watchful creatures. The cadets recoiled reflexively from the sudden light, lifting arms or tails instinctively to shield their sensitive eyes. Sierra squinted hard, her pupils dilating instantly to control the incoming brightness. Javi turned her head away with a shocked cry, then slowly peeked back over her shoulder. Jarell merely grunted again, though Mark caught the tension in his jaw. "Easy," Mark said. "It is not bright. It only feels bright because you spent so long in the dark." "It feels like staring into a star," Sierra whispered. Mark raised the torch slowly, so its flame illuminated more of the cavern. The amber light touched stone pillars, jagged ledges, and uneven ridges that none of them had known were so close. The cavern revealed itself in pieces. First a sloping ramp that led downward into a corridor, then a series of sharp drops along the left wall, and a narrow shelf to the right, where moisture had collected in a shallow pool. The cadets murmured among themselves, some relieved, some unsettled. "The torch is stable," Jarell observed. "It burns clean." "It will last long enough for navigation," Mark said. He tested the balance again and tightened the vines with his free hand. "We can make more if we need them." "How many can we carry?" Javi asked softly. "At least 3 more," Mark said. "But for now, 1 is enough to see the path." He stepped toward the edge of the platform, holding the torch high. Shadows danced wildly across the cavern as the flame flickered. The stone ramp sloped downward unevenly, with jagged ridges along the sides and a narrow walkway in the middle. One careless step could send someone sliding into a drop. The cadets stared at the path, each taking in the hazards revealed by the light. "This course was not designed for darkness," Jarell muttered. "Too many sharp edges, too many risks." "Exactly why the instructors removed the light," Mark said. "They wanted us to find another way." "Wanted you to find it?" Sierra corrected, her gaze fixed on the torch. "We would have circled this platform until time ran out." Mark said nothing. The flame reflected in Sierra's 3 pupils, turning her normally cool expression into something closer to awe. Javi stepped slightly closer, drawn to the warmth. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Unstable," Jarell countered, "but effective." Mark lowered the torch slightly so the others could adjust to the flickering shadows. "Stay close," he said. "Not so close that the flame touches you, but close enough to see the ground. We move slowly. The stone here is uneven." "You will lead?" Jarell asked. Mark nodded. "I will take the front. Jarell, you take the rear. The others stay between us." "Understood." With the plan settled, Mark took his first step down the ramp. His boot met the stone, and the tiny flame threw long shadows that darted like fleeing animals. He tested the ground with each step, mapping the ridges with the caution of someone who had spent many nights exploring forests at dusk. The cadets followed, their breathing synchronized into something almost steady. The flame revealed more as he advanced. Strange plant-like growths clung to the walls, thin, transparent sheets that shimmered faintly in the firelight. They rippled as the heat brushed them, bending like delicate wings. Water trickled along a distant channel, creating a faint but steady pattern that helped Mark orient his direction. The cavern curved slightly to the right. The firelight revealed the curve, exaggerating its edges, transforming simple stone into looming shapes. Sierra gasped when a shadow stretched into a monstrous silhouette across the ceiling. "It is only stone," Mark said. "Watch the ground, not the walls." Javi nearly tripped on a protruding ridge, but Mark caught her arm in time, steadying her before she fell. "Thank you," she whispered. "Stay close to the center," Mark said. "The edges drop off here." The torch began to burn more steadily as the resin melted into a smooth pool of fuel at its top. The flame grew slightly taller, warming the air around them. Shadows danced like restless spirits, but the cadets kept moving in a line, guided by Mark's steady pace. He reached a plateau, the first flat section since the ramp, and stopped so the others could regroup. The plateau branched into 3 possible paths. One tunnel was narrow and jagged, another wider but slanted sharply, and the third smoother but darker than the others. Mark raised the torch toward the ceilings above each path. The narrow one dripped moisture from sharp stalactites. The wide one had loose stones scattered across the floor. The smooth one curved downward into a deeper passage with faint airflow. "We follow the airflow," Mark said. "It means the passage is stable and leads somewhere." "You can tell all that from air?" Sierra asked. "Air movement tells direction," Mark replied. "Old trick from hiking trails." He lifted the torch and stepped into the smooth passage. The cadets followed without protest. The torch lit the way, turning every risk into something visible, navigable. As the group moved deeper into the corridor, the oppressive darkness retreated an arm's length at a time, pushed back by human hands and ancient fire. The flame wavered, but it held steady enough to guide them forward, and with every step, the cadets grew more certain that they would not be swallowed by the dark again. The chapter closed not with the torch's light fading, but with the unmistakable sensation that the group had crossed a boundary, from panic into fragile confidence, from helplessness into action. Mark tightened his grip on the torch and continued forward into the unknown, knowing the flame he carried was not just light, it was trust. Mark advanced deeper into the smooth tunnel, the resin torch lifting shadows away from the walls in restless, flickering arcs. The air grew cooler as the group descended, and the faint draft he had sensed earlier now brushed steadily along his face and arms, carrying a mineral scent that hinted at open space somewhere ahead. The cadets followed close behind him, their footsteps measured and cautious. The corridor narrowed for several meters, forcing Mark to hold the torch close to his chest to avoid catching the flame on protruding stone veins. When the tunnel widened again, the flame cast enough light to reveal an uneven stretch of floor ahead. Large stone slabs jutted out at irregular angles, forming natural steps that climbed downward like a broken spine. Sierra hissed softly at the sight. "This descent is unstable," she said. "The stones shift." "Step where I step," Mark said. "And keep your center low." He placed his foot on the first slab. It wobbled slightly under his weight. He tested it twice before shifting fully onto it. The flame danced with every motion, throwing distorted shapes across the walls. Jarrell followed next, his weight causing the slab to tilt with a scraping groan. Mark saw the torchlight ripple over the cavern ceiling as the stone shifted under the heavier cadet, but Jarrell managed to steady himself with one clawed hand against the wall. Javi descended after him, teeth clenched, one hand gripping the vine-wrapped side of Mark's harness as if anchoring herself to something solid in the chaotic dark. Once all three stood on the first slab, Mark moved to the next. The descending stones formed a zigzag pattern, each step angled differently. Without light, the passage would have been a death trap. Even with the torch, it demanded slow precision. Twice Mark had to shift the flame close to the ground to inspect cracks that could have swallowed a foot. Each time he signaled for the cadets to wait, the group fell silent, listening only to the subtle creaks of stone beneath them. Halfway down the broken descent, a sudden vibration rippled through the slabs. It was faint at first, like a distant impact traveling through the cavern structure. Mark froze instantly, lowering the torch to reduce its shifting glow. Jor-El stiffened behind him, his tail curling upward in instinctive alertness. "Something moved," Sira whispered from above. "Stone somewhere deeper." Mark listened. For several seconds, there was nothing but their breathing and the soft crackle of the torch's flame. Then the vibration came again, this time stronger. Mark braced his feet at opposing angles and held the torch outward. The flame showed dust trickling from the ceiling near the bottom of the descent, and a small rock tumbled free, clattering down and bouncing off two lower slabs before disappearing into dark. "The cavern is changing," Jor-El said through his teeth. "Or something is moving within it." Mark scanned the shadows along the lower wall. The flame revealed small indentations carved into the stone, grooves that did not appear natural. He stepped down another slab and angled the torch. A horizontal crack widened into a narrow gap at floor level. It pulsed faintly with shifting dust. "It is settling," he said. "The vibrations are coming from the lower structure adjusting. Not an intentional trap." "Intentional or not," Sira said, "we need to get off these slabs." Mark nodded and continued. The last few steps pitched downward more steeply, and the final slab dipped at an angle that forced him to crouch almost to his knees to maintain balance. He pressed his palm to the floor at the bottom before stepping off, testing for stability. Solid. The others followed, each lowering themselves carefully. Jor-El let out a long breath once he reached the bottom. "If we were without fire," he said, "this descent would have shattered half our legs." "That is why we move while the torch lasts," Mark said. The corridor ahead stretched into a narrow passage, but at the far end the shadows broke abruptly. The flickering amber reflection hinted at a wider space just beyond. Mark stepped forward, the air growing cooler still. When he rounded the last bend, the cavern opened into a massive chamber. The torchlight reached only a fraction of it, illuminating a circular area about the size of a training hall, but the sound of their footsteps echoed outward in all directions, swallowed by the great depth of the space. The floor immediately in front of them leveled out into a flat stone platform. Beyond the platform, however, the torchlight revealed a series of suspended stone pathways that extended like spiderweb strands toward the center of the chamber. Narrow, uneven, and precariously placed, these pathways hung above a dark drop that the flame could not penetrate. Javi stepped closer to the edge and peered downward before recoiling with a soft gasp. "How deep is that?" she whispered. "Deep enough that we do not want to find out," Mark answered. He held the torch outward, scanning the nearest suspended path. The stone surface looked almost polished from age or intention, and fine cracks ran along the edges where anchoring points met the chamber walls. "We take the center path," Mark said. "It is the widest." "It is still scarcely more than the width of my shoulders," Sira muttered. "We will manage," Mark said. He stepped onto the suspended pathway. The stone dipped a fraction under his weight, stabilizing only when he shifted his center of gravity. Jor-El followed, his heavier frame making the path sway slightly. Javi pressed herself close to Mark, her eyes locked on the torch. The further they advanced, the more the suspended path reacted to each step. It swayed in subtle arcs, and the flame wavered in response. Mark slowed his pace, planting each foot with the care of a tightrope walker. "Do not look down," he said. "Focus on the next step and the stone beneath you." "I am not looking down," Javi whispered. Her trembling voice suggested she desperately wanted to. The path carried them toward a stone pillar at the chamber's center. As they neared its base, Mark noticed something etched into the pillar's surface. Symbols, angular and deeply carved, circled the stone. He moved the torch closer. The symbols resembled directional indicators. The instructors must have placed them intentionally. One symbol pointed to a higher ledge across the chamber. Another pointed down a lower chute hidden beneath an overhang. "These markings show the correct route," Mark said. "If we follow the upper ledge, we should reach the next section of the course." Jor-El leaned in to examine the symbols. "Then we need to reach that ledge." Mark raised the torch and looked at the adjacent suspended path branching upward from the pillar. It ascended in a shallow incline, but several sections appeared cracked. "We go slow," he said. "Watch my movements. Step where I step." They ascended the path. With each step, the incline grew steeper, forcing Mark to lean forward. The flame illuminated scattered debris across the path, small stones, chunks of broken stalactite, and thin patches of dust that could cause slipping. He used the toe of his boot to sweep aside loose pieces as he walked, clearing safer footholds. Halfway up, the path narrowed even further. Mark had to turn slightly sideways, hugging the wall. The flame licked upward, illuminating the cliffside only inches from his cheek. Javi whimpered when she had to replicate the movement. Mark held the torch back toward her as she passed through the tightest point. Her skin shone faintly in the firelight, slick with nervous perspiration. "Almost there," he said. "The ledge is just ahead." He was right. The path widened abruptly as it connected to the stone ledge carved into the chamber wall. Mark stepped onto it and raised the torch. The ledge ran horizontally along the chamber's curved interior, disappearing into a tunnel on the far right side. The flame revealed faint tool marks along the ledge, signs that instructors had shaped it intentionally. "That tunnel leads somewhere important," Mark said. "It must be the next section." He guided the group along the ledge, each step now easier than the swaying path behind them. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, swallowing the torchlight as if eager to reclaim its darkness. When they stepped inside, the air changed again. It grew warmer, thicker, and carried the faint scent of metallic dust. Mark lifted the torch higher and saw that the tunnel walls had been lined with thin metal veins, as though the stone had been reinforced to prevent collapse. The ground beneath them vibrated with a low hum, machinery, ancient or concealed, functioning somewhere deeper within. "This is the right direction," Jor-El murmured. "Something waits ahead." Mark agreed. Whatever lay inside this reinforced tunnel was part of the trial's final challenges. The torch sputtered once, then regained strength as melted resin pooled at its base again. He tightened his grip on the handle and stepped forward into the deepening passage. The cadets followed close behind him, trusting the fragile circle of firelight that pushed the darkness back just enough for progress. The chamber of suspended pathways fell behind them, but the tension of the unknown ahead grew sharper with every step. Mark knew the torch would not burn forever. The next challenge would need to be met quickly, efficiently, and without hesitation. And as the tunnel curved downward once again, he realized the trial was entering its most dangerous phase yet, one where light alone might not be enough. The tunnel deepened in slow curves, and with each bend, the hum beneath the stone grew clearer until it no longer felt like a distant vibration, but a deliberate pulse under Mark's boots, almost like a second heartbeat for the cavern itself. The air warmed further and started to taste faintly of metal, dry and sharp at the back of his throat. He shifted the torch from one hand to the other, feeling the handle slick with resin residue and sweat. The flame had shortened, losing some of the eager height it had at the beginning, but it still burned with a stubborn, focused glow, as if refusing to go out before its work was done. Behind him, the cadets moved more quietly now than at any point since the trial began. The earlier panic had gone, replaced by a wary discipline that Mark had seen in combat simulations, but rarely during regular drills. Sierra kept close enough that he could hear the soft rasp of her boots just behind his right shoulder. Javi followed her, lighter step almost ghost-like. Jor-El guarded the rear, his heavier weight anchoring the group rhythm. The tunnel walls gradually flattened and rose higher overhead until the passage opened into a final chamber. The transition was subtle at first. The hum beneath the stone shifted from a diffuse vibration into a layered resonance, and then the tunnel walls fell away, leaving the group standing at the threshold of a wide, circular space. Mark lifted the torch as high as his arm allowed. The flame cast an amber ring across the floor ahead, and what it revealed made him stop short. The chamber was built like a machine's heart. Concentric rings of stone platforms rotated at different speeds, each separated by gaps of varying widths. Some rings turned silently, others emitted a faint grinding sound where old mechanisms strained against time. In the very center, raised on a still circular dais, stood a narrow archway framed in smooth metal. Above the arch, a small strip of pale luminescent paint shimmered faintly, clearly marking it as the exit gate. The problem was not recognizing the exit. The problem was reaching it. "Moving platforms," Jor-El said quietly. "No rails, no harness lines." "Gaps are irregular," Sira added. "Some are 2 strides wide, some are 3. If someone misjudges a jump—" She did not finish the thought. She did not need to. Mark watched the spinning rings for several breaths, studying the timing of each rotation. The torchlight skated across them in shallow arcs, painting and erasing details with each flicker. The outermost ring moved slowest, barely more than a shifting floor underfoot. The next ring turned more steadily, and the one after that moved quickly enough to turn a simple step into a dangerous leap if timed wrong. The innermost ring, just before the central dais, spun in the opposite direction to the others, as though designed specifically to break momentum. "This is deliberate," Mark said. "The instructors want coordination, not just bravery." "Bravery without sense leads to fractured bones," Jor-El muttered. "The torch will not last long enough for hesitation," Sira said, her gaze fixed on the shrinking flame. The resin had burned down to a dense, glowing core. Wax-like drips blackened at the edges, and the brightest part of the fire had pulled inward, concentrated. Mark knew that once the core was consumed, the flame would gutter fast. Minutes, maybe less. "We do not need the flame for every step," he said slowly. "Only for the first pattern. Once we understand the timing, we finish on instinct." Javi swallowed audibly. "Instinct in the dark?" "Not completely dark," Mark replied. "The arch has luminescent paint. Once we are close enough, we can use that as a guide." He stepped forward onto the unmoving stone just before the first ring. The slow rotation swept across his field of vision like a lazy tide. He tracked a small crack in its surface with his eyes as it passed and counted under his breath until it came back into view. 4 seconds per rotation, he said. "Pretty forgiving." "For those with your legs," Sira said. "Javi's stride is shorter. Mine is lighter." "Then I take more distance on each jump," Mark answered. "You follow the same timing but land earlier on the same platform. Jor-El can anchor the group at each ring." Jor-El grunted. "If someone slips, I can grab only one person at a time." "One is enough," Mark said. He felt nervousness coiled tight in his chest, but he locked it behind the same calm voice he had used since the lights went out. He lifted the torch a little higher so the flame could cast its reach across the first ring and part of the second. "We go in pairs," he decided. "I will cross first to each ring, then turn and guide the rest." Sira's frills fluttered at the edges with unease, but she nodded. Javi tightened her hands into fists until the faint glow paint at her wrist harness flickered under the strain. Mark set his gaze on a point just past the edge of the first ring, waited until the crack he had tracked completed one more rotation, then stepped forward. The stone under his boot shifted gently, almost politely, as if making room. He followed the movement for 2 slow steps. Then, once he felt the rhythm, he bent his knees and pushed off toward the second ring. The gap between rings was just wide enough to force commitment. For a brief, weightless moment, The torch flame stretched backward in a thin line, painting a trembling arc across the dark. Then his boots struck the second ring. It jolted under the impact, but he landed solidly, knees absorbing the shock. The second ring moved faster, so he had to adjust immediately, turning to face the others before his footing could slip. The torchlight swung wildly with his movement, flaring across uneasy faces at the threshold. "First gap is fine," he called. "Two long strides, light push." "You made it look simple," Javi said, voice shaking. "It never is as simple as it looks," he answered. "Sira, you first. Listen to my count." Sira stepped onto the slow outer ring and held her arms slightly out for balance. In the torchlight, her usually composed features were tight with focus. Mark watched her position, counted under his breath to sync with the rotation, then said, "Now." Sira launched forward. Her form was not as explosive as his, but her center remained well aligned. She landed a little short of where he had, toes near the edge, arms flaring to counterbalance. Mark grabbed her forearm and drew her fully onto the ring before she could slide. Javi followed next. Her jump lacked power, but she compensated with a low posture, landing on both boots and immediately dropping into a crouch. Jor-El crossed last, his mass causing the platform to dip noticeably, but his claws dug into the stone with easy familiarity, anchoring him. "Next," Mark said. The second ring's rotation demanded more precision. The gap to the third was slightly wider, and the speed difference meant anyone misjudging the timing might be thrown sideways instead of forward. The torch flame flickered down again, burning shorter, but still bright enough to mark the edges. Mark memorized the rotation count quickly. 3 seconds per full turn, he murmured. "We wait for a clean alignment." The cadence of the ring's movement tightened around his senses, and when the moment felt right, he moved. The second jump bit a warning into his calves. The landing nearly slid his heel along the far edge, but he corrected with a quick hop sideways, torch swinging dangerously close to the lip. The heat licked his knuckles. He exhaled hard, repositioned, and signaled again. "Sira, same push, slightly earlier." She obeyed his count. This time her landing was cleaner, sharper. He hauled her inward by the wrist anyway, unwilling to leave even the smallest risk unattended. Javi hesitated longer, but when she finally moved, her jump carried the desperate precision of someone who had no intention of falling. She hit the stone with a grunt and grabbed Mark's elbow without shame. Jor-El crossed last and nearly overshot, momentum driving him closer to the inner edge. Only an instinctive backward shift kept him from spilling into the darkness below. Mark heard his claws carve thin grooves in the stone as he stopped himself. The torch crackled. A bit of resin popped and sent a tiny spark into the air, which vanished quickly in the cold draft that rose from the unseen drop. The flame's core had shrunk to a fierce, concentrated point, illuminating less of the room but burning with iron determination. Mark glanced at the final gap. The difference was immediately obvious. The jump to the inner ring would be the hardest. Not only was the gap widest, but the ring spun in the opposite direction and at a tempo that felt intentionally unnatural, designed to disrupt the instinct built from the first 2 rings. Beyond that ring, the central dais and the exit arch waited in stillness, a perfect calm after the storm of moving stone. "We make this one count," Mark said. "No corrections after." "If someone falls short," Sira began, then cut herself off deliberately. "No, that thought is useless." "Exactly," Mark said. He looked directly at Javi. "You can do this." Javi nodded once. Her jaw was clenched so tightly that a small muscle jumped near her temple, but her eyes held firm. "Explain the timing," Jor-El said. "Once only." "This ring moves opposite to the one we stand on," Mark said. "We have to push not just across but slightly into the spin. Think of it like stepping into a crosswind instead of with it. I will go first again. Watch the way I land." He studied the rhythm for several seconds, counting silently. The outer and inner ring's edges aligned imperfectly 9 times, then finally matched on the 10th in a pattern that looked almost like kindness from the trial designers. On that moment, he thought. He bent his knees and moved, pushing off with all the power he could muster without losing control. The jump stretched longer than the others. For an instant, his body hung between motion and emptiness, and he felt the opposing spin tug at his trajectory. He angled one foot forward, one slightly behind, ready to absorb the twist. His boots hit the inner ring hard, the impact sending a jolt up his spine. The ring tried to twist him sideways, but he sank into the motion, redirecting the force into a sliding step. When he came to a stop, he was breathless, but upright. The torch nearly slipped from his grip. He tightened his fingers until the rough binding dug into his skin. "Safe!" he shouted, voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Sira, on my count. Trust the pull, not your fear." The next 9 misalignments passed like taunts. Sira held her position at the edge of the third ring, chest rising and falling. On the 10th, when the edges lined up again, Mark called, "Now!" Sira leaped. For a terrifying second, her arc looked too low, but the cross spin caught her and dragged her forward. Her feet struck the inner ring off balance. She lurched sideways, claws scraping stone. Mark slammed the torch handle into the crook of his elbow and lunged, catching her forearm as her weight tilted toward the drop. For 2 heartbeats, they hung in a grim balance between disaster and salvation. Then she found footing and pushed back, and he hauled her upright. Her breath came out in a shaky laugh, equal parts fear and exhilaration. "This is madness," she whispered. "You are welcome," he replied, though his own pulse thundered against his ribs. Javi came next. She did not wait for encouragement beyond his count. When he shouted, "Now!" she jumped with a cry that sounded almost like defiance. Her lighter frame rode the cross spin differently. Instead of threatening to throw her off, it swung her into a low slide that ended almost at his feet. He grabbed her shoulder and steadied her. Only Jarrell remained. The heavier cadet took longer to line up his stance. When he finally jumped, his trajectory was powerful, but slightly mistimed. He hit the inner ring half a step past the ideal landing point. The spin tried to fling him forward, not sideways, driving him dangerously close to the central dais, but leaving his heels on the ring's outer edge. For one breathless instant, it looked like he might tumble face first into the stone lip of the dais, but he twisted mid-slide, turned the impact into a roll, and came up on one knee. A low, humorless chuckle escaped him. "I am intact," he said. "For now." Mark let out a relieved breath he had not known he was holding. "Then we finish this." The central dais no longer felt distant. It was only one careful step away. The inner ring continued to spin beneath them, but the gap was narrow enough here that Mark could time a short, controlled hop instead of a leap. He moved first, landing on the solid platform with a relief so intense it almost felt like dizziness. The moment his boots hit the unmoving stone, the hum beneath the floor changed tone, shifting from a layered vibration into a single, sustained note. Sira, Javi, and Jarrell crossed after him. The torch, as if obeying some hidden cue, sputtered and shrank again until its flame was little more than a glowing tongue clinging to the last scrap of resin. Mark turned toward the archway. Up close, the luminescent paint above it looked almost unbearably bright compared to the fading fire. Soft white light traced the edges of the metal frame, outlining the open passage beyond. It was not natural daylight. It was the clean, clinical glow of facility lighting. It meant safety, completion, and the end of the trial. Mark walked forward until he stood directly beneath the arch. He lowered the torch and watched the final ember struggle. He felt a fleeting, irrational sadness at the idea of letting it die, as if extinguishing it might erase the proof of what he and the others had done. Sira stepped beside him. "You can let it go," she said softly. "You brought it this far." "It brought us," Javi added in a quiet voice Mark barely caught. Jarrell said nothing, but his presence at Mark's back felt like agreement. Mark knelt, pressed the torch's smoldering tip against the stone, and watched the flame finally gutter out. Thin smoke curled upward, then drifted away, swallowed by the ventilation currents. For a moment the group stood in near darkness again, illuminated only by the glow of the arch. The darkness felt different now. It was no longer an enemy. It was just a condition, something that could be changed. "All right," Mark said. "Let us graduate this lesson." He stepped through the archway. Brightness slammed into his eyes as the facility lights of the observation corridor flared to full strength. He blinked hard, squinting until his pupils adjusted. Sierra, Javi, and Jor-El emerged behind him in a staggered line, each wincing as sight flooded back in a controlled blaze of white. Along the corridor walls, transparent panels shimmered to life one by one, revealing instructors and observing officers watching from enclosed rooms. Instructor Vedra stood front and center behind one of the panels, arms folded, expression unreadable for several seconds. Then she keyed a control on the console before her. The transparent wall faded to open transparency, and her voice reached them clearly. "Trial complete," she said. "Time, 43 minutes. Injuries, none. Unauthorized tool adaptation, extensive." Mark stiffened at the last phrase, unsure if the word unauthorized meant reprimand or praise. "You stripped all light sources," Jor-El said, his tone edged but respectful. "You expected us to improvise." Vedra's gaze moved over the group, lingering briefly on the resin-streaked wrists, the smudged faces, the faint blackened smoke marks on Mark's hands. "I expected you to adapt," she said. "How you chose to do so was the true test." Another instructor spoke from farther down the corridor, voice laced with curiosity. "No cadet group has ever constructed independent light in that chamber set before. Most rely on tactile navigation and accept injuries as inevitable." Vedra's mouth curved in a rare, thin smile. "You changed the parameters without waiting for permission. That is dangerous in some contexts. In this one, it is exactly what survival demands." Sierra glanced at Mark, her expression caught between pride and something more complex. "We would not have done it without him," she said. "He knew how to make fire." "He knew an old method," Vedra corrected gently. "Each of you chose to trust it, to contribute to it, and to move as one once it existed. That is the part that matters." Javi's shoulders straightened. The tremor that had followed her all through the moving platforms was gone now, replaced by a quiet glow in her eyes. Jor-El folded his arms, nodding once in reluctant acknowledgement. "What happens to the torch remains?" Mark asked, surprising himself with the question. Vedra's gaze flicked to the chamber behind them, where the spent torch lay cooling on the dais. "The system will clear it," she said, "but the record of what you did will stay." She tapped a control on her wrist. "Your run is logged, flagged, and archived. Future instructors will study this variant when designing new trials." Mark did not know why that mattered so much, but it did. The idea that the desperate, improvised fire he had coaxed into existence in perfect darkness would outlast the moment warmed him in a way the actual flame never had. Vedra stepped forward so the corridor sensors could register her presence and formally end the trial. The hum that had lingered beneath the floor since the tunnel began faded completely, leaving only the soft buzz of standard facility systems. "Remember this," she said. "Resources will fail. Technology will break. Environments will change. The universe is not obligated to respect your preferences for comfort." Her gaze landed on Sierra, then Javi, then Jor-El, and finally Mark. Sometimes the only difference between a lost squad and a living one is the person who can look at a hostile condition and say, "I can make something from this." Today, that was the human. Next time, it might be one of you. Sierra's frills lifted in a quiet expression of determination. Javi nodded, her fingers flexing as if memorizing the feel of resin that was no longer there. Jor-El exhaled in a short, resolute huff, as though filing the lesson away under categories he respected rather than merely tolerated. Mark said nothing. He did not feel like a symbol. He felt tired, resin sticky, and vaguely incredulous that the desperate idea he had grabbed in the dark had actually worked. Yet as he glanced back one last time toward the arch and imagined the cavern beyond, now cold, now unlit, now empty of movement, he knew that something had shifted permanently. Instructors could remove every engineered light source the Academy possessed. Administrators could write protocols that stripped away familiar tools and comfortable assumptions. But they could not erase the fact that he and his squad had walked into absolute darkness and taught themselves to carry light. Later, when the debrief was done and the comments were logged, the cadets walked side by side down a quieter corridor. Sierra walked a half-step closer to Mark than before, as if his presence was no longer a novelty, but a reference point. Javi chattered in low, excited bursts about next time, about how she wanted to try making a torch herself instead of only braiding the vines. Jorel did not say much, but when an overhead fixture flickered for a fraction of a second, he did not glance up in alarm. Instead, he gave Mark a sidelong look and a small, sardonic raise of his brow crest that needed no translation. If the lights failed, the squad knew whom to ask first. Mark let the corner of his mouth twitch up in response. The trial had ended. The cavern lay behind them, sealed and quiet. Yet the real result of the exercise walked away on 4 pairs of feet, carrying a new understanding stitched into memory. That light was not just something issued by an instructor or activated by a command or expected as a default condition. Light could be earned. Light could be made. And as long as someone in the group remembered how to do that, no darkness, natural or manufactured, would ever be absolute again.